Hey there, guys. All right, today we are back with some more overly sarcastic productions, and this time we're turning to a history summarized. I felt like we should hit up Mexico this time around. Don't know why, I just felt like it. That's really it. Um, before we dive in, make sure you go and check out the links in the description box below. I would love to join the Discord and follow me over Twitch, and please do go check out the gaming channel here on YouTube. Now. A 12-minute summary of Mexico is not enough time. I think we can all agree on that. I'm really curious how Blue is going to handle this. I feel like it is likely going to be summarized too much. Right? I do believe that like yes, I understand in certain things. Um some things, right, when it comes to summarizing or oversimplifying, um, and of course, with the oversimplified, you can argue that is the point of the channel. But honestly, with the length of his videos these days, I don't think that's the point of his channel anymore. Um, at a certain point, you are summarizing too much and making something too brief. Um, and so you need to like not do that, like expand a little bit more. um and we've run into that issue before on these history summarized videos. I can't really point to anyone none are standing out in particular to me at this point in time, but yeah, uh hopefully this one is good, but we'll see. Let's dive right in.
Mexico has got a lot going on in its history. From ancient civilizations building temples to the sun and sowing panic about the year 2012, to a
Praise the
great empire
sun.
with a city in the middle of a lake and a habit of hucking people off of pyramids, to its less than willing participation in New World globalization and its development into an independent nation state. To put that into proper historical terminology, that's a lot of stuff.
Y'all, after that one episode of Trope Talk, I really can't see it. I can't unsee it. The gap between the bookshelf and the wall. I see it now.
Going on. So to organize this and find out how Mexico became Mexico, let's do some history. This video is brought to you by NordVPN. More on that later. While civilization along this stretch of lands dates back thousands of years to players like the Olmecs, the Zapotecs, and the Maya, our story begins in the power vacuum left by the collapse of the Toltec Empire in 1122 AD. In the absence of any one dominant power, a series of small city-states carved out their own little corners of influence. 200 years later, the Mexica tribe settled right in the middle of Lake Texcoco to fulfill a prophecy. They were told that the apparition of an eagle perched atop a cactus and eating a snake would mark their new home. So upon seeing it, rather than look a gift eagle in the beak, they camped out right in the lake and began building the city of Tenochtitlan. The Mexica then allied with two of their neighbors to form the Aztec Empire. Through a combination of military skills, some fetching outfits, and a trusty obsidian macahuitl, the Aztec Empire grew to dominate the land from coast to coast. Meanwhile, the capital Tenochtitlan
I
became
will say I do I do want to focus on positives as well. I don't want to just be negative with things that are getting overly summarized, but I do like the map here. Um, Emphasizing the whole fact that, right, like there were parts inside of the Aztec Empire that were not part of the Aztec Empire, right? Sometimes when people do maps, a lot of the time they just do it like as you see here for the the Mayans. But right there, if he's added the details, right? He's paid attention. That's good.
coast. Meanwhile, the capital Tenochtitlan became a fabulously huge and beautiful city of canals, palaces, markets, aqueducts, and more. ¿Dónde está El Dorado?
Oh no.
And then the conquistadors showed up. Some 30 years after Columbus accidentally wandered into the Caribbean, Spain was in full-on empire mode. Though there wasn't a great deal to be found in the Antilles, some scouts brought word that there was a shiny big civilization to sack on the mainland to the west. So one enterprising gentleman by the name of Hernan Cortez defied the crown's orders and hopped over to the mainland in 1519 with some 500 fellow conquistadors, the absolute greediest and nastiest brutes that Renaissance Spain had to offer. While the numbers game wasn't strictly in Spain's favor, they had steel swords and armor that made the obsidian blades and wooden shields look like paper mache. Now, the Aztecs, being a conquering empire, had made a series of enemies, like their neighbors the Tlaxcalans, who were all too thrilled to offer thousands of warriors for Cortez's army.
I want to know one thing that always I feel like gets just not discussed whenever we talk about the colonization thing here, and especially with the Aztecs, I mean, with the certain native groups here siding with Cortez to just fucking get rid of the Aztecs. How did they communicate? What was the communication like? How, like, that's what I want to know. And I feel like no one ever talks about it. I want to know how the communication was, like, possible.
Army. But perhaps the most deadly ally that Spain had in this fight was smallpox, which, among other European diseases, killed anywhere from half to 90% of the native Mesoamerican population. After Cortez kidnapped King Moctezuma, dodged an arrest attempt from his commanding officer, and ordered
What?
his ships to be burned to ensure there was no possibility of retreat, the conquistadors captured Tenochtitlan in 1521 after several battles and a long siege and fully eradicated the
That little bit of information there regarding Cortez, burning the ships and avoiding an arrest from one of his officers. I've never heard that before. So far, Blue, you're doing a really good job.
Aztec Empire. And now with all that icky pagan nonsense out of the way, Spain's got itself a brand new Spain. Step 1 was to stop Cortez from acting like a de facto monarch, because why would he exercise restraint now? Back in Spain, King Charles V created a series of advisory boards to attempt to rein in Cortez, but when that didn't work, Charles just stripped him of his powers and established the Viceroyalty of New Spain in 1535. Step 2 was building up a new capital on the site of Tenochtitlan, which was newly renamed after the old tenants of the Aztec Mexica tribe, which is where we get the name Mexico. Step 3 was governing the place. In addition to the power of the monarchy, Spain formalized their superiority over the native peoples through a casta system, which classified everyone from Iberian-born Spaniards down to indigenous peoples with Mexican-born criollos and mixed-blood mestizos in the middle. Step 3.5 was adopting an old Aztec law mandating public labor and transforming that into the Spanish encomienda system, which wasn't technically slavery, but it was pretty dang close.
Yeah.
Step 4 was Christianity. In New Spain, the Catholic Church had land, power, and an undying determination to convert everybody. Polytheism is usually pretty open to new gods, so getting Jesus in was fairly easy, but getting Quetzalcoatl, Tezcatlipoca, and the rest of the gang out was far trickier. So missionaries got a bit torch-happy and burned countless texts. A few did attempt to limit the harmful effects of colonization, but they got pushback for suggesting that non-Spaniards had, gasp, basic human dignity. And others used Aztec human sacrifice as justification that hippity-hoppity, your soul is my property, so it was a rocky process. The Aztec heartland quickly became the new urban core, with spots like Mexico City and Guadalajara inland and Veracruz and Acapulco on the coasts, but cities were soon going up all over New Spain. Though, as this is colonialism we're talking about, the real aim was to bring resources and wealth back to Iberia, and that came in the form of food and silver. While some Spaniards were still hunting for El Dorado, and surprising nobody but themselves, failing horribly, silver became the dominant metal export. And the Old World soon got to taste cocoa, chilies, corn, and tomatoes, which boosted and also stabilized the European food supply. The problem for Spain was that they didn't really have all that great a grasp on macroeconomics, so they overinflated their economy and squandered their money on losing wars. Spanish power swiftly dimmed, and France and Britain soon got to flexing their might in the New World. And at the end of the 18th century, Mexico fought alongside America during their War of Independence, and the Mexican soldiers who were there took some notes to bring home. At the turn of the 1800s, Mexicans were fed up with the casta system and its favoritism of Spanish-born peninsulares, and with the success of recent American and Haitian revolutions, Mexico was willing to give it.
He mentioned Haiti. Yes! Yes! Thank you! The Haitian Revolution is just as important to American independence, independence throughout the Americas. It's just as important. Yes!
It a go themselves. On September 16th of 1810, a Criollo priest named Miguel Hidalgo took advantage of Spain's current king.
And then I'll extrapolate a little further on why I think that. I think the Haitian Revolution is just as important towards the American Revolution because the American Revolution was a revolution of the bourgeoisie against, right? Against, they were getting taxed more fairly. Like, that's essentially what was happening. The American Revolution was not necessarily a popular revolution among the lower classes. Lower classes didn't really care. It was the bourgeoisie, the mercantile elites that cared about the new taxes being levied upon them by the British government overseas. The Haitian Revolution was a popular revolution because it was a slave revolt. So it was a revolution of the lower classes against the ruling elite and also colonial elite. So That's my statement on that. Extrapolation, I guess.
Listeners to give the cry of Dolores and begin the War of Independence, which he lost, but his idea lasted. The revolution went on in fits and starts for the next decade with some constitutions, but not a lot of independence. The problem was that nobody could agree on what they wanted out of the revolution. Independence, a republic, equal rights, all three? Depends on who you asked. But the turning point came in 1820 when Spain, now re-kinged after the Napoleonic nonsense, got a newly liberalized constitution. The higher classes feared that an exportation of those liberal ideas to Mexico would mean the end of their extremely cushy socioeconomic status. So a general in the Spanish
Liberalism for me, but not for thee.
army by the name of Agustin de Iturbide flipped and teamed up with the revolutionary leader Vicente Guerrero to hash out some compromises for a new independent government. These three guarantees of monarchy, egalitarianism, and Catholicism became the goals of the revolution. And when their combined armies marched on Mexico City, they had no trouble yeeting the Spanish loyalists right on out of there and forming an independent Mexican empire with Iturbide as emperor. So now Mexico's got independence, but what about that carefully crafted political compromise that kinda held this whole operation together? It went pretty quickly out the window. Nobody seems to be happy with the new government, and most aristocrats carried on not giving rights to the mestizos and natives. Iturbide was ousted and later executed, and Central America seceded from the Mexican Empire. Not a great start. As time went on, the economy was stagnant because no government was strong or consistent enough to create and enforce rules, so the local economy shriveled as corruption soared. The biggest figure to emerge in the half-century after Mexican independence was Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, a former general turned politician who served as president and/or dictator for most of the next 2 decades. Watch out, this becomes a trend. Santa Anna had the galaxy brain idea of encouraging American immigrants to settle in the state of Coahuila y Tejas to shield from raids by the Comanche Nation and also boost the northern economy. This failed spectacularly as he essentially imported an entire population that was bound to agitate for more rights. When they did, Santa Anna effectively told them to shove it and then was surprised when they immediately revolted. Things got real at the Siege of the Alamo, but despite early Mexican victories, the Texan revolutionaries won the decisive Battle of San Jacinto in 18 minutes and personally captured Santa Anna to add insult to injury. They let him go, but his problems got worse when Texas joined the ever-growing United States. They and Mexico had a mix-up over some soldiers killed on disputed land, which led to a second and even more disastrous war for Santa Anna. The US invaded along the Pacific coast of California and the eastern Gulf Coast and routed Santa Anna to capture Mexico City and force a surrender. The resulting Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo saw Mexico cede all of its northern territories to the United States, from Colorado all the way to California. This was rough, as Mexico now languished in military failure, bad governance, and a deflated economy for another decade before Santa Anna was ousted for good in 1855. 2 years later, a new constitution took power from the church to help prop up the lower classes, but this didn't sit super well with the church elite, so a civil war between conservative Catholics and liberal Democrats swiftly broke out. Yay. In the course of the 4-year war, both sides borrowed huge sums of money from Spain, France, and England to finance their militaries. And when the liberals won the war in 1861, Europe came to collect for both tabs.
Money.
Which goes to show that war profiteering
Imperialism takes many forms beyond standard colonialism. States have often used economics as a means to control and exploit others. Yep, that is called neo-colonialism. Word of the day.
is great because no matter who wins, you still get rich. Easy. Obviously, Mexico couldn't pay all of this, so they defaulted on their debts. In response, the French Emperor Napoleon III decided to take matters into his own empire and invaded Mexico to place a Habsburg puppet on the throne.
Did not go
France
well.
landed on the Bay of Campeche and pushed towards Mexico City, but was spectacularly halted in its tracks by the Mexican army at the Battle of Puebla. This is what Cinco de Mayo is about. It's not so much an Independence Day as an anti-recolonialism day, which is different but has the same core energy to it. Unfortunately, the war wasn't over, and France regrouped to capture Mexico City and install their puppet Maximilian on the throne. 3 years later, the Mexican Republican Army recaptured the north, and America shot some nasty eyes at France, so they decided, better off not fighting a war on two fronts, and then they withdrew. The new Mexican government set about some much-needed reforms because, oh man, Mexico has been having a rough century here. The next 4 decades saw the country secularize, reform the central government to be stronger and more efficient, build infrastructure, and modernize the army. That last one is relevant because the 1980s through 1910s had another military strongman turned politician who rigged elections and manipulated the army to stay in power. After winning an especially controversial election in 1910, widespread revolts forced him to flee. But this revolution ran into trouble when the leaders failed to agree on a new government, so Mexico descended into a decade of open rebellion. The revolutionaries were defeated and a couple more military strongmen held the country, but things started looking up in the second half of the century, as Mexico's involvement in World War II kickstarted decades of economic progress that continues to this day. I wasn't lying when I said that Mexican history is busy, but it's also extremely complex, and the Mexican identity is one of the most fascinating and trickiest artifacts of this history. For instance, in the 80s there was a new statue of Cortez, his Nahua wife Malintzin, and their mestizo San Martin, which intended to celebrate the convergence of cultures, but instead it was met by fierce student protests who saw Cortez as a predator and Malintzin, or La Malinche, as a traitor to her Nahua people. The debate over this statue is a very recent microcosm of the beautiful harmonies and the stark contrasts that make up Mexico's history. A story that's deep, inspiring, and sometimes dismaying, but above all else, very much alive. As we've seen, it can be hard to protect your empire from
And that was History Summarized Mexico. Blue did a much better job on this than I was going in expecting, based on like the last couple like History Summarized that we've watched. I feel like they haven't been his strongest. This one was really good, despite, doing it in like 10.5 minutes. The fact that he was able to do as much as he did in 10.5 minutes, and I feel like he explained it pretty damn good for a summary. Like, I am not at all upset here. This was fantastic. I think this is of course it is a very summarized history of Mexico, but I still think it is a very good summary of Mexican history. I don't really have any complaints, right? If I were to really make a complaint, I'd be like, spend more time. But then, right, it's right, then we're just adding time to a summary. There wasn't anything in here that jumped out to me that I felt like it was too overly summarized. Except for maybe towards the end there. 'Cause I feel like talking about Pancho Villa, that Civil War thing going on, I think would have been pretty good to do. I think he could have probably talked about that a bit, summarized that one a little bit, put more depth into that summary. But aside from that, yeah, really nothing stood out to me as being like, oh, you should have spent more time here or there. I feel like for a summary, this was great. So with all that said, I hope my statements here at the end made sense, were, coherent, and I hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more, and I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.